The next topic of our mental health and physical rehabilitation panel 6 is from Lifeline Ukraine, how the large-scale war impacted the national hotline and prevention of suicide. So we will hear from the founder of the first hotline to prevent suicide in Ukraine, Lifeline Ukraine, Paul Niland. You're most welcome, Paul Niland.
Good morning to you all. Thank you very much for the introduction, and thank you very much to August Mission for inviting me to come and close out your conference today. I believe that I am the last speaker. I've been asked to fit this into about 10 minutes, so I'll try not to go on for too long. Let me introduce myself first of all. As our colleague here just introduced me, my name is Paul Niland, not Niland. I am the founder and director of Lifeline Ukraine. I'm originally Irish. I was born in Dublin, but I've lived in Kiev for the last 20 years. I'm also a journalist as well. I became a journalist, in fact, by accident about a decade ago. After the theft of Crimea, but before the beginning of the war in the Donbass, Vladimir Putin wrote an open letter to the 28 heads of state at the time of the European Union. And when I read it, I just said, I'm going to take this apart line by line. It was full of lies. And that was my first real published article. The last article that I wrote was published by the Atlantic Council. It's a look at the position of the Russian Federation on the United Nations Security Council. It's a position that they're not entitled to. They have simply grandfathered themselves in from the position that the Soviet Union once had. So they're essentially occupying a position there. My next article should be published today. And the article is simply entitled, Why Ukraine Won't Negotiate. And it simply lists what Ukraine's position is with regards to negotiations with the Russian Federation. The history of Lifeline Ukraine is quite simple. It was established initially, as many of the other speakers have talked about today, to support the veterans community. That was our first goal. But when I began this journey, I suppose it is, I took a sheet of A4 paper and I started writing down some of the things that were my key goals. Number one was best international practice. Number two was evolving to become the national suicide prevention hotline for everybody, for all Ukrainians, not specifically a focus on veterans and veteran families, but for anybody who would need our help. The hotline began operations on October 14th, 2019. Previously, October 14th was Defenders Day here in Ukraine. It's now changed, and it's now October the 1st, I believe, but that is when we began operations. It's very symbolic. And to date, Lifeline Ukraine has now provided 76,000 individual instances of support. That term, instances of support, we use that because it's not necessarily 76,000 people helped, because we can have throughout the course of an evening or throughout the course of several days, we can have multiple calls from the same person. So we register each individual instance of support around about in line with international norms for other suicide prevention hotlines. Our crisis cases where we answer the phone and there is an imminent threat of loss of life, that's about 15% of our work. They're the most serious instances that we're dealing with. But pretty much all of the calls that we have, I'll tell you a little story. Way back when we started this, I used to read every single day our call log to look at the reasons why people were calling us. And one day I'm looking through this, and I have been traditionally more of a Russian speaker than a Ukrainian speaker, but our records are in Ukrainian. And I saw this word, samotnost, in Ukrainian. I looked at my colleague and I said, what's this? And she looked at me and she said, одиночество. And I'm like, I still don't know what that is. but just never come across it. And she spoke English, and she looked at me and she said, loneliness. And that really had an impact on me in recognizing the importance of the work that we do. And loneliness is still one of the things that is listed as one of the categories of calls that we get at Lifeline Ukraine. So while not all of our calls are crisis situations, we're all adults in this room, I can swear. Anybody who calls Lifeline Ukraine is having the shittiest day of their life. And what we do is we are there to provide support and to help that person. One of the previous speakers was talking about breathing exercises. It's one of the things that we do very, very regularly when people call us is we help them to regulate their emotional state through breathing exercises. It's one of the most simple and effective tools that we can use. The question or the title of the presentation is, how has the full-scale war affected us? Well, before the 24th of February, it's an infamous date now, and I despise using that date, but it is a part of our history now and a part of our reality. Before the 24th of February of last year, we used to average about 1,000 instances of support provided every single month. By the summer of 2023, we were providing an average of 4,000 instances of support per month, which is a stark indicator of the level of psychological trauma that exists throughout the country. We've been able to manage the surge in demand with our existing resources, I mean our existing human resources. But recently what we've been doing is we've also been adding volunteers to our team as well to spread the burden a little bit. You can imagine that anybody who works in our line of business, the nature of the calls that we're taking, the kind of conversations that we're having, they're difficult on our consultants. And so adding to the team means spreading the volume of calls between a larger number of people. The other thing that happened was that, I mean, Kiev came under attack immediately on the 24th of February, but eventually Ukraine's armed forces, Slava SCU, they pushed the Russian invaders out of Kiev Oblast. And then we began seeing the kind of war crimes and atrocities that the Russian occupation had led to. And at the time, I was reading a book called When the Dust Settles. It's by a British crisis management specialist called Lucy Stanhope. And what she does is she goes around the world at the request of the British government after a mass casualty event, after natural disasters like tsunamis or earthquakes or things like that. And she's one of the key crisis management people in the UK. And I knew, looking at the kind of traumas that had been inflicted by the Russian invaders, I knew that Lifeline Ukraine needed to adopt a similar crisis management kind of approach. So we began to prepare. And how did we begin to prepare? Well, we organized training sessions so that we could be better prepared to help people who are calling us in the particular instances of support that would be needed as a direct result of this phase of the war. So the first one that we tried to understand better was how to help people who are displaced. And there are two ways of looking at this. Number one is you can look at it from the individual perspective. So for each individual, each family, they've lost everything that was close to them. They've lost their homes, they've lost their schools, they've lost their friends, they've lost their jobs, they've lost all familiarity. Then you have to look at that by zooming out as well. There are the individual traumas, the individual losses, but then we have 6 million internally displaced people within Ukraine. And we have another 4 million Ukrainians who are now in third countries as refugees as well. So we knew that this was going to be a big issue. The next thing that we looked into is how women are specifically affected by the war. They might be overseas and their partners have to stay in Ukraine because men are not allowed to leave the country. They might be the wife or mother of somebody who is a service personnel. And so we looked into that. One of the most awful things that the Russian barbarians have been doing, and we've read about it, there's a piece in the New Yorker, which I recommend that you look up. It's called How Ukrainian Psychologists Are Helping Rape Victims. The cases of sexual violence are just, they're abhorrent. But when I was reading this New Yorker piece, it was describing conversations with some of the victims, and one of the victims said, "I don't want to live anymore." And we knew that this was going to be something that Lifeline Ukraine was going to have to know how to approach and how to help people to see a path forward from. How were children affected by the war? Helping people who are bereaved because the loss of life from this phase of the war is immense. And losing a loved one is one of the precursors potentially to suicidal ideation. If you've lost someone that meant the world to you, then your world suddenly makes no sense. And so we needed to understand more how to help people who are bereaved. And one of the previous speakers from Unbroken had a list of those who can be affected by PTSD. It's very often thought that PTSD is directly related to people who've served in the military. It's not. Anybody in Ukraine can suffer from PTSD because of our exposure to Russian aggression. So they're the kinds of things that we did in the second half of 2022 to prepare ourselves to serve the country. That's what we do. We serve Ukraine. The future of Lifeline Ukraine looks like this. At 4 years old, we've got a lot of experience already, but we're still a relatively young organization, and so we have room to grow. We have to continue to raise awareness of Lifeline Ukraine. I wrote the word anticipate there. We can bet on this, we can guarantee this. The call volumes to Lifeline Ukraine are going to continue to grow, and so must our team. And we will continue to expand into other areas such as training, which makes me look at Yulia sitting in the second row there. Yulia from the International Medical Corps is waiting on my updated proposal following our last meeting on Tuesday, because we're going to be doing more and more training in partnership with IMC throughout the regions to go and talk to psychologists and social workers in various different oblasts to help them to understand better how they can support somebody who may be experiencing suicidal ideation. In closing, money's important. Money is always important. We've been lucky to have been supported by various groups from the international donor community. We've had a grant from the US State Department, one from USAID, one from the British Embassy. But the fact is that Lifeline Ukraine has an operating budget that we need to meet in order to be able to continue providing the support that we've been providing for the last 4 years. So one of the things that we're doing right now is we're focusing a great deal of our attention through our social media awareness work on fundraising, crowdfunding. And so we're encouraging people to support us on a regular basis on Patreon or make donations through PayPal. There's a way to donate through our website as well. We're also, in addition to that as well, building a corporate coalition, which currently stands at just 2 members, but companies who look at the potential loss of a colleague to suicide as a matter of their employee safety, rather than a donation to my charity as a matter of corporate social responsibility. And in fact, the second organization or second company that joined the corporate coalition, one of their senior management had lost a child to suicide. And so when I had that conversation with him, they were straight on board immediately. I've left my email address there at the bottom. It's very simple. The organization is Lifeline Ukraine. My email address is paul@Lifeline Ukraine. If anybody would like to write to me or inquire further about how they could support the work of Lifeline Ukraine, if there's anybody from the international donor community who would like to give us a grant, that would be awesome. My contact details are there, paul@Lifeline Ukraine. And I thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions, then I'd be more than happy to